Hi everyone, I'm XPT and I'm currently ranked in Diamond 3 on the US, which places me around the top 500 players in the region. I'm slowly but surely climbing, so I'd love it if you came to join me on my Twitch stream linked in the description below. Anyways, for today's video, I'd like to present my guide on how to execute the Raidboss Shyvana build properly. The idea behind this team composition is basically to make your Shyvana as much of a monster as possible and have her become a raid boss. This composition is centered around Shyvana, with a Shapeshifter and Dragon buff, making her extremely hard to kill with her support whilst at the same time dealing tons of damage. The reasons why we want to play this composition is that it is just super fun to watch Shyvana turn into a raid boss and pretty much single-handedly burn enemy teams once we got all the items that we need on her. It's also fun to play because it is actually quite flexible in terms of the units we can deploy alongside Shyvana as support. Also, after getting our core units, this build feels like one of these team compositions that can basically infinitely scale into the late game. Other than that, this comp is actually doing quite well in the meta, and with the new patch changes in 9.14b and what is going on in PBE right now, I can only see it getting even stronger. With Orcs being buffed and with Volibear getting nerfed, it means this build will become even stronger against some of the other popular team comps in the meta, such as Assassins, Yordles, or Sorcerers. All of those compositions are somewhat countered by this Raidboss Shyvana composition. Some of the problems that this composition has is that it is extremely item dependent. While the surrounding units around Shyvana and Aurelian Sol are quite flexible, the items required actually are not. This means that you really cannot force it unless you have the necessary items you need to create a Raidboss Shyvana. Another problem this comp runs into is that despite being extremely strong in the mid to late game, if you take too much damage early, you end up just losing before you can even get your Shyvana online. Finally, this composition can struggle versus hard CC, such as Glacials. The on-hit effects from Shrinkblade or Morello's or Red Buff can also be really annoying to face, but I have actually beat quite a few comps that abuse these items, such as Gunslingers or Brawler comps, that do not have much CC. As a side note, a lot of people think demons counter Shyvana since they prevent Shyvana from transforming, but actually with good positioning she can still transform, and after a certain point Shyvana comps will start to get stronger, and we can almost guarantee a transformation from Shyvana. So I'd say that the demons against Shyvana comps matchup is actually a more even and skill-based one. As we said, the core of this composition really relies on items. So in order to force this composition, we first need to make sure that we have the required items. For this reason, if you want the highest probability to be able to force this comp with success, then I'd actually recommend to try and pick up a Giant's Belt in the opening carousel round. The reason for this is that Warmogs is maybe the most core item on Shyvana. Since Giant's Belts are actually not the most sought after items in the early carousel rounds, we actually have a decent chance of being able to force this build somewhat consistently. Otherwise, good signs to be able to force this comp would be when we pick up some components to Shyvana's 3 core items, which are Warmogs, Hextech Gunblade, and Phantom Dancer. So the item components you're looking for are Giant's Belts, a Recurve Bow, a Chain Vest, and a BF Sword or a Needlessly Large Rod. These are the essential items we need to pull off a Raidboss Shyvana comp, and with these items she can carry our whole team to victory. I would say that by the first carousel it is essential to have at least one of these 3 items completed, and preferably some components to the second one already as well. Now as long as we have this good item start, then we are good to go, and we'll be able to force this Shyvana raid boss comp. In ideal situations, we'd also pick up some early Shapeshifters, especially Shyvana, and an early Lulu or Morgana. But to be fair, the units are not as necessary as the items, as we'll almost always be able to smoothly transition into the units that we need. Not many people will be contesting for Shyvana, and this means that we shouldn't have too much trouble compared to some of the other metacomps finding our core units to complete the composition. Let's talk a bit about the main idea of this composition and the core units. Shyvana is the centerpiece of this composition, and basically we want her to carry us, so for this reason we stack her with all of our items, and we surround her with all the units she needs to get buffed. So we already listed the core items for Shyvana earlier, so let's focus on the Shyvana's surrounding cast. Shyvana will need 2 other Shapeshifters. Which ones they are really won't be too important, to be honest. As the game goes on in general, we replace Nidley or Elise for Swain or Nar, but to be honest, the Shapeshifter's main purpose is there just to give Shyvana the Shapeshifter buff, which grants a huge 60% maximum additional health. The other key component will of course be getting Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is going to grant the dragon buff to Shyvana as well as himself, which means that neither of the dragons will be taking any magic damage, which is super key to Shyvana becoming a raid boss. The funny thing is that we don't even really care about our other shapeshifters or Aurelion Sol too much. They're basically just there to increase the strength of Shyvana, so it isn't super important to upgrade their levels to 2-starred or even put items onto them. So in order to get 3 shapeshifters with Shyvana, our core composition will end up consisting of only 4 units. Shyvana, 2 other shapeshifters out of the remaining 4, and Aurelion Sol. This is going to leave plenty of room for flexibility in terms of the remaining units we field onto the arena to support our raid boss. Now that we know our core units, let's talk about the different variations of the build that I've had success with. There's currently 2 main variations of the build I love to use Shyvana with, and that are being played more often at high ELO. I'll now guide you through the 2 main variations I currently use a lot, as well as a couple of build paths I see with potential for Raidboss Shyvana. So the first build only has a 6-unit core. It will consist of Shyvana, Aurelion Sol, Nidalee, Elise, Lulu, and Morgana. This is probably the fastest way to get Shyvana online, since you only need level 6 to get all our core units. With these 6 units, we'll have 3 shapeshifters, 2 dragons, 3 sorcerers, and 2 demons. Morgana and Lulu are 2 of the best supportive sorcerers in the entire game. Lulu's ultimate makes Shyvana even stronger and even harder to kill, and Morgana can also do a really good job of supporting Shyvana, both because of her game-breaking ultimate that deals tons of damage and has crowd control, as well as the fact that she is also a pseudo frontliner. Morgana can be itemized with things such as a locket or redemption. I found redemption on Morgana with this build works really well, since it basically guarantees that Shyvana is going to transform into a dragon form, which is going to be the key in winning battles. The 3 Sorc buff is also really nice, since it means that Morgana and Aurelion Sol will be able to add some damage to the team comp. So if we have spare items from creep rounds in the form of rods or tears, we should generally be putting them onto Aurelion Sol or Morgana. Good items for Morgana are Redemption, Locket, Zeke's, and Morello's, while Aurelion Sol can make use of almost any AP or mana items, but generally I like stuff like Rabadon's Deathcap, Ginsu's Rageblade, and Seraph's, although Luden's Echo and Shoujin's Spear also work really well on him. Later on in the game, we almost always want to put in Gnar for Nidalee, and Swain for Elise, so we shouldn't be aiming to 3-star any of our shapeshifters other than Shyvana really. If we get a 7th unit, I could recommend Kennen. Kennen is super strong right now as a single ninja, and in this comp he will also complete a Yodel buff for us, along with Gnar and Lulu. Kennen brings our team some nice extra crowd control that is always helpful. Otherwise, if we can find Yasuo, he can also be surprisingly good as an addition, since we can just place him in the front line all alone, and he'll draw a lot of the enemy fire to him for a few seconds. And even if he dies, he basically did his job, as it gave our Shyvana enough time to transform into a dragon, which is one of the keys to winning fights with this team composition. The second variation of the Raidboss Shyvana comp I've been using with good success is going to be the Demons and Dragons build. With Demons and Dragons, we want to get the 4 Demon buff, along with our Shapeshifters and Dragon buff. This is probably my personal favorite version to run, since I find the Demon buff really strong in general, and it's still really flexible and fun to play. So the most common variation of Demons and Dragons I run would be Shyvana, Nidalee, Elise, and Aurelion Sol, with Morgana, Aatrox, and Evelynn. So our core is going to be completed at level 7 later in the game. We should again look to replace our tier 1 shapeshifters with Swain and Gnar. Usually Nidalee will be swapped out for Gnar, and Elise will be swapped out for Swain later on in the game. If we ever do get Swain, by the way, then try to get a Phantom Dancer on him, and he's going to be a super strong champion. With just a Phantom Dancer, Swain can carry fights even if he never gets upgraded to a tier 2 unit. In this build variation, Morgana provides the same supportive role as in the first variation, and her itemization really won't change much. Although with this variation, I'd rather prefer to focus my secondary itemization onto Aatrox if possible. Aatrox brings in another frontliner who can take some focus fire from the enemy, giving our Shyvana some more time to transform into dragon form. I love using Aatrox in this comp as a tanky ult bot, so I would prioritize getting him a Guardian Angel so that he can revive and ult repeatedly. With a GA, Aatrox can die mid-ult, but his ult upon revival will be instant, so GA is a super good item on him. Another interesting item I love to put on Aatrox with this build is actually going to be a Yumi's. Since the purpose of Aatrox in this comp is basically just to be a frontline alt-bot distraction for our Shyvana, making Aatrox a sorcerer works really well, as it gives him more mana to ult more frequently. Since his ult is so powerful, this actually adds a ton of damage to Aatrox, and with GA, he is already going to be quite annoying and tanky for the enemy to deal with. By making Aatrox a sorcerer, it's also going to complete our 3 sorcerer bonus for a great synergy to give some added power to our Morgana and Aurelion Sol. Evelyn will be our 4th demon, and is actually a really useful demon to have in comps with 4 or more demons. The thing with demon comps is we want to be able to mana burn the units to render their spells useless. So while Morgana, Aatrox, and Swain or Elise can be mana burning the frontline, the problem arises when we won't be able to mana burn the backline, and their backline is still going to be safe. This is where Evelyn comes in. A lot of people think Evelyn is just kind of this subpar assassin, but actually she works super well when her main role is more utility-based, and her main purpose will just be to distract the enemy backline whilst mana burning them. This is why I'd rather pick Evelyn over Varus or Brand in this team composition, especially since we already got Aurelion Sol, who kind of uses the same items as Varus or Brand, and will have a somewhat similar role. A newer variation of the Raidboss Shyvana build will be the Wild plus Shapeshifter plus Orcs build. Now, Wild plus Shapeshifters may have been popular in previous patches, but it was never such a strong build, and also it didn't used to focus on the dragon buff much, so this would be a new variation. But now that Wild and Sorcerers are getting buffed, I think this variation definitely has some potential to become meta and very powerful. The way this build would be set up is very simple to understand. You basically get your 4 wilds with Nidalee, Gnar, Ahri, and most likely Warwick. The rest of our comp will be our Shyvana, Aurelion Sol, and Lulu. I can definitely see the 4 wild buff being of good use to Shyvana though, increasing her power even more. Actually, Aurelion Sol, Lulu, and Shyvana all scale quite well with attack speed, so I think the buff to wilds could be really good for them, and this comp could be worth trying out for sure. Now, I haven't actually tested this variation of the strategy out much yet, so I'm not sure how it will work, or its specifics, but I'd imagine that with the Wild and Sorcerer buffs, this could end up being really powerful. One thing about this particular build is that since Warwick and Nidalee will remain core units throughout the game, and they are only 1-cost units, I could imagine that we may want to roll a bit more early game compared to the other variations of this build, in order to get our units early, rather than level up to 6. And find our core units such as Aurelion Sol and 2-star Shyvana. I'll talk about the execution of all of these builds soon, but for now let's focus on the wilds. We might have some games where we want to 3-star Nidalee or 3-star Warwick if we plan on sticking with the wilds for the entire game, so for this reason I could imagine that we may naturally commit to this variation of the Raidboss Shyvana comps earlier than usual if we find ourselves getting lots of early Warwicks and Nidalees. The final variation of Raidboss Shyvana that I'll include in this guide is going to be Raidboss Shyvana with Elementals. It's pretty common to just toss some Elementals into any strong comp nowadays, since Elementals are just a really strong synergy in general, and even with their recent nerf, they're still always worth considering just for the extra unit, and especially since Kennen is still so powerful. The great thing about Elementals is that, since they are so powerful innately and bring an extra unit for us, it isn't as reliant on items, and we can just give items to whoever we think would benefit the most. But basically, as we see, there's a lot of flexibility when we try to go with the Raidboss Shyvana. In terms of units, we just really want to stack her with the correct items. This means we can pivot into our ideal comp based on our roles and not have to throw too much gold away looking for that final 1 unit, as the only core unit in this comp that can be hard to find would be Aurelion Sol. But since Aurelion Sol is only really there to give Shyvana the dragon buff, we only need 1 single Aurelion Sol to make this work. Putting items onto Sol and getting him to be a secondary carry is really only a free but huge bonus that comes with this comp. Now that we have discussed some of the variations of this comp that we could pivot into, let's talk about the actual execution of it. Basically, like any other comp, we want to not lose too much health in the early game, and depending on the flow of the game, level up or reroll. One of the keys to the early game with this comp is finding an early game carry for us to stack items onto until we want to bring in Shyvana. The ideal carry would be someone who can make good use of Shyvana's 3 items, the Hextech Gunblade, the Warmogs, and the Phantom Dancer. So I find Garen or Darius to be 2 of the best early game carries, who utilize these items especially well. Although I also find Kassadin and Fiora to work great. Even someone like Graves, Shen, or Zed can work though. I wouldn't want to use Aatrox or Warwick as my carries, even though they could work, just because I might potentially want to use them later in my main comps if I go with demons or wilds to complement my raid boss, Shyvana. And I also wouldn't want to use Varus or Lucian because they don't use Warmogs as effectively. Though I do think that Varus and Lucian can actually be great item holders for Aurelian Sol until we find him, if we are just getting a bunch of AP and mana items from the creep camps. Even though Aurelian Sol isn't actually supposed to be the main carry of this team composition, if he gets properly itemized and gets 2-starred, then he definitely can become the main carry. It's just that usually Shyvana is going to be easier to 2-star and get items onto earlier, so Shyvana is more consistent, but if we do get Aurelian Sol items along the way, then I definitely recommend to get an item or two onto him as well, so that we can have multiple carries. With these item holders as our early game carries, we want to construct a strong team that can hold up during the early game so we don't lose too much health. Once we find this early game team composition that will revolve around our early game carries and some other random synergies or 2-star units, we basically just try to hold on to our gold as good as possible without re-rolling too much. Our goal should be to get to level 6 quickly while staying relatively healthy, so we shouldn't be re-rolling too much in the early game in general. If we find some pieces of our core comp along the way, that is great, but not essential, as we should be able to find them at level 6 anyways, since Shyvana isn't usually the most contested unit right now, and she probably never will be since she is so item reliant. Once we have enough gold to reach level 6 and use some gold to roll and make our transition, then that's the time to do it. We need to find our complementary team to Shyvana that will always consist of our 2 Shapeshifters and Aurelian Sol. While looking for them, we should also pick up the other components to the team we are looking for to complete our core of either Sorcerers, that will be Lulu and Morgana, or Demons, that will be Aatrox, Morgana, and Evelynn, or Wild plus Sorcerers, that will be Ahri and Gnar alongside Nidalee and Warwick, who we should already have if we were planning on going wild, or finally the elementals with Brand, Kennen, and Lysandra. As we find our units, we put them out into the arena with due diligence. Sometimes it will be best to just put them in as 1-star units because they are core components, such as Aurelian Sol, or because they might complete a synergy. Other times you may want to wait a bit before you can upgrade them to 2-starred. Knowing when and how to transition comes with experience, but in general, you always want to put Aurelian Sol in immediately to give Shyvana the dragon buff. Also, if we find Gnar or Swain, then we generally want to replace the 1-cost Shapeshifters for them. Otherwise, we want to complete our synergies before taking out our early 2-star early game carries such as Darius or Garen. Most of the times, we look to transition and strengthen our squad the most during level 6. Once we have decided which variation of the Raidboss Shyvana build we want to go for, our goal is going to be to strengthen this team composition to make sure we do well during this transitioning phase and stay strong. Once our transition is complete, we move past the early to mid-game, and everything from here is basically just strengthening our team by leveling up and adding synergies. But our core has now been completed. One of the great things about this team composition is that we always feel like we can add something onto it as the game progresses. For example, in our demon example, I could get to level 7 to put in another demon and get the 4 demon buff. After that, I could then get to level 8 to add a 3 Sorc buff, or if I already got Yuumi on Aatrox, then I could even put in Kindred and replace Morgana with Karthus at level 8 to get the Sorcerer plus Phantom buff, whilst keeping the Demon buff since maybe I found Swain by then. The mid to late game flexibility of the Raidboss Shyvana team composition is one of my favorite things about running this comp. This will be it for my guide on the Raidboss Shyvana team composition. I wish you all good luck and have fun watching your Shyvana 1v9 in your games. If you like this video, make sure to follow me on Twitch in the description below. And finally, like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to encourage me to keep on making this type of content for you guys. This was XBT, and until next time.